Everyone see?
Mhm.
Are you showing the
Oh,
source sheet?
now I am. Can everyone see?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we are going to tonight look at what for me was, I would venture to say, the most overlooked of the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments. We're of course in Parshat Yitro, which has the story of the giving of the Ten Commandments, the revelation at Sinai. Begins with the appearance on the scene of Moshe's father-in-law Yitro. I'm just trying to adjust my my windows here so I can see everyone. It's giving me a hard time. I will do that. Right, so we have the fascinating character of Yitro, and we have the whole build up to the revelation at Sinai, and then we have the Ten Commandments. And so I wanted to focus on the final, on the 10th of the Ten Commandments, and it's already a little bit unclear if we should be translating it as the Ten Commandments, right? We colloquially say Aseret HaDibrot. In the Torah, it's referred to as Aseret HaDvarim, 10 things or the 10 matters. But we colloquially refer to it as the Ten Commandments, and then there's all sorts of interesting debates about, if it is in fact 10 commandments, well, how do we count the 10 commandments? Most famously, there's a debate, which we'll touch on actually in a little bit, about the first of them, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God. Is that considered a mitzvah or is that a statement? One very famous opinion says that it's not a mitzvah because it's a prerequisite to all other mitzvot. Before you can have any commandment, you have to first have a belief and establishment of the commander. And so whether we translate it as the Ten Commandments is in itself a really interesting question. But we're going to focus, as I said, on the 10th of the 10 commandments or statements. In our Parsha, in Parshat Yitro, Sefer Shmot, it appears as follows. Lo tachamod beit reyecha, lo tachamod eshet reyecha, ve'avdo, ve'amato, ve'sharo, ve'chamoro, ve'chol asher l'reyecha. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his servant, his male servant, his female servant, his ox, his donkey, or anything else that your neighbor owns. In Sefer Devarim, the formulation in source number 2 is as follows. Lo tachamod eshet reyecha, v'lo tit'aveh beit reyecha, sadehu v'avdo v'amato, sharo v'chamoro, v'chol asher l'reyecha. Do not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not desire your neighbor's home, his field, his male servant, his female servant, his ox, his donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. So what's different between those two formulations?
The land is not mentioned. A field is not mentioned in the first one.
Neither is the wife.
Mhm.
No, the wife is. It's in a different order, right? So in Shmot, it's first appears Beit Reyecha, your neighbor's house, and then Lo Tachamod Eshet Reyecha, your neighbor's wife. Whereas in Devarim, it's
I'm not seeing it on the source sheet.
number 2.
Number two,
1
at
and
the
number 2.
beginning.
No.
In Devarim. No,
Number 2.
Shmot.
His
Shmot
point is
number
that
1.
it's not in the first one.
What's not in the first one?
The mention of the wife.
It
It
is.
is.
It's right here. It's in a different order.
Oh, it's not in the translation.
Oh,
No. Oh.
that's weird. I must have cut it out.
That's interesting, Rabbi.
Oh dear.
No,
We won't tell anybody at the Jewish Times about this. No.
thank you. No, the Sefaria has a number of different translations, and whatever it defaults to has footnotes that they incorporate into it. And so I try to cut out the footnotes to just give us a most literal translation possible, and I guess I cut too far. It's certainly there in the Hebrew. I apologize for that. But so it is there in both instances, but the order is different. So that in itself is interesting. Any other differences?
Yeah, I mentioned the field. The field is in Devarim, but not in Exodus.
Okay, so we have the field in Devarim, so it seems that there's a more expansive list of that which is coveted in Devarim than in Sefer Shemot.
And there's a difference.
They're about to go into the land. It makes a lot of sense, you know? They're
Yeah.
just about to go in, yeah.
Yeah. Beatrice, what were you saying?
There's a different verb. The first
Yeah.
one it's word twice, and the second one lo tachmod, then lo titave.
Right. So that's another interesting difference, right? In Sefer Shemot, it says lo tachamod, which is translated in both instances as you shall not covet. And again, if I cut off some of that translation, that's totally my fault. But in Devarim, it begins lo tachamod with the same verb. Then it transitions, it switches to lo titaveh. You shall not crave, you shall not desire. So what's the difference between tachamod and titaveh? Coveting and desiring, what's the difference?
Yeah. That's, it's gotta be in Hebrew.
Covet's a stronger word, but how to say that?
Okay, so we'll come back to that in a little bit. We'll come back to that possible distinction or what the difference might be. Okay, so this is, as we said, I didn't bring the entire list, but this is the final of the unit that we call the 10 Commandments or the Aseret HaDibrot. And do you think, if you were to make a list of, well, it's a loaded question to say of the top 10 or the most important 10, because it's unclear that the 10 Commandments are the most important 10, but the first 10 that are presented to the Jewish people, would this be one that you include in it?
Well,
The
this
answer
is,
is
this
yes,
is,
because
this
God
is,
included
this
it.
is, this one is different because it's not an action per se, it's a thought in your mind. You're not
Okay.
allowed to have this thought, which is quite a, to me, it's controversial. I mean, what if you covet or crave something of your neighbors, but you don't do anything about it? I mean, it's just in your head.
Yeah.
It's very, very different than the other commandments.
So that's one major question, is how could it be that we're commanded this emotion or this thought? We've raised this question before, right? The ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, love Hashem. Again, how can you be commanded to love lo tisna, don't hate your neighbor? How could you be commanded not to have that emotion? But that's one very important question. Is it certainly is different than the other 10, or at least most of the other 10, in that it's not directed at an action, but at thoughts. And is that something that can be legislated in the same way? So that's one really interesting question that we'll spend some time with.
It's a wonderful transition to Mishpatim. I mean, because it raises the question of possession. What is the legal possession? It raises a question that can only be answered with the whole rest of the halacha. Really.
Okay, so Anne notes that that in next week's parsha will be Mishpatim, which is a whole list of all sorts of civil and property laws, and so this might be a nice transition or introduction into right, sort of like a general header. We have to be very careful about property law because of this danger of coveting that which is not yours. So the other question that many people ask is this a commandment or a statement that is deserving to be included? Right? We think about the other 9, and they seem to be at maybe a different level, right? is not, even if we can say that the Torah can legislate against emotions and can offer rules and laws about what we should be thinking, is not coveting on the same realm as not murdering, not stealing, keeping Shabbos, not doing idolatry. Is it at the same level?
Well, it could lead
Could
to
it be
all,
that
it
coveting
could,
leads to the other sins?
it could lead to all the others.
Okay, so it could lead to all of them. That's an interesting suggestion, and it's a suggestion that the Rambam makes. So let's go to the Rambam and just ground ourselves at source number 5.
Hmm.
So the Rambam says, and this also gets on that distinction between Tachmod and Titaveh. Hata'ava mivi'a lidei chimud. Desire leads to coveting. Okay, so we ask, what's the difference between lo tachamod and lo titaveh? It says that desire is the first stage, which we could ask, well, why does the Torah first say lo tachmod and not lo titaveh first? But it says, right, so if you desire something, if you desire money, if you desire a big house, a fancy car, then if you see someone else has it, you'll come to covet it. V'hachimud meivili de gezel. And if you covet something, if you see something you want that someone else has,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
then you will you may come to steal it from that person. She'im lo atzuha ba'alim limkor afal pisha hirba lehem ve'damim ve'heftzir bereim yavo lidei gezel. Right? Even if you could afford it, even if you have money and you offer, I'll give you $50,000 for your car or whatever, and they don't want to sell the car, so then you might come to steal it. And if the owner stands and tries to protect their property, it may lead even to bloodshed. Right? This is the in halachic terms, right? This is the classical reason you're allowed, right? Haba b'machteret. If someone sneaks into your home to steal something, so halachically you're allowed in certain circumstances even to go to as far as to kill them in order to ward them off. So so the Rambam seems to be seeing it very much as a protective measure, as a what we would call in halachic terms a geder, a fence. Now, lo tachamod is a fence, and as many pointed out, it's a fence that that in order to avoid coming to the others on the list of the 10 Commandments. So
It's interesting that coveting, even if one has something, if one sees somebody else, even with the same thing, there is sort of a jealousy or a unsatisfaction with one's own possession.
yeah, right. So that happens also, right? If you work really hard and you put all your savings and you buy that big fancy boat or that nice car that you always wanted, and then you see someone else driving the same car, and you're like, wait a second, that's not cool. This is my baby, right? This is what's going to define me. And so there's this also jealousy of status, or perhaps not quite jealousy, but sort of you begrudge someone. You have a hatred towards them that they have the same possession that you thought was uniquely yours. Or
That lack of satisfaction with your own possession.
yeah, and we'll definitely get there. So the issue that some raise with this understanding is, again, we tend to think of the Aseret HaDibrot as being these really core cardinal principle commandments, values, statements. And it seems that it would be a little bit odd that one of them would just be kind of auxiliary to the others, right? That lo tachmod, according to this understanding, to this explanation, is not something that stands on its own, but it's only to prevent us from violating the other ones in the list. That's what Rabbi Samet says in source number 6. This is the same Rabbi Samet that we're using extensively in our study of Tehillim on Shabbos afternoon. He says the difficulty that arises from this explanation is that it makes one of the 10 commandments into an auxiliary to the commandments that precede it. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal. If we understand this commandment as a fence guarding other grave sins, then the prohibition of coveting loses its own independent significance. However, its status as one of the 10 commandments would seem to indicate that it does in fact have its own fundamental and independent significance. So it's a interesting critique. I'm not sure it's necessarily holds up, meaning one of the key principles of the halachic system is the idea of geder, is the idea of siyag laTorah, making a fence for the Torah. So I'm not sure that, it could be that if this is the introduction to the Torah's legal system, to the halachic system, it could be that introducing the idea of a siyag or a fence at the very beginning is in fact core and fundamental to what the Torah and halacha is all about. There's other interesting questions about can there be, if this interpretation, understanding of lo tachmod is accurate, could there be a biblically mandated fence, right? Normally we think of a fence as something to protect, to prevent us from transgressing on a biblical level, right? So we don't eat chicken parmesan because even though chicken is not defined as halachic basar in the same way that beef or lamb or venison would be, nonetheless, if we were to allow the eating of chicken with dairy, that may come to have people eating other meat with dairy. So generally speaking, the fences that we establish are dirabanans, are rabbinic protective measures to avoid coming to transgress a biblical prohibition. That's not necessarily always the case. Perhaps the most well-known example of this is that the Rambam, Maimonides, seems to believe that, for example, we've all heard of shomer nagia, of not touching members of the opposite sex that you're not married to. So the Rambam seems to say that any physical contact with a member of the opposite sex that you're not married to is actually a biblically mandated prohibition, which is to avoid coming to prohibited sexual contact. So there are some fences that are biblically mandated. Perhaps we could say, some of the Pesach, right, getting all chametz out of the house, which is a Torah prohibition, might also be as a protective measure to avoid coming to eat chametz on Pesach. But generally speaking, we assume that that siyagim, that fences are not biblical. So that would be another perhaps hole in the Rambam's understanding of it. Any questions or reactions to that?
I was thinking about the prohibition against possessing idols. This is also a fence against that, I guess you could say.
It could
But
be,
isn't
meaning like, yes, it certainly could be seen as a fence that if you don't possess it, there's no way you could come to worship it. But owning it in itself could be giving some significance or recognition to it. So, there's different ways that these things get understood. But you're right, there are we could think of other biblical prohibitions that might really be fences and not, or auxiliary to other prohibitions. So that's another good example.
is the prohibition against an idolatrous thought covered in this first version of the Ten Commandments, Dibros?
Prohibition against an idolatrous
It
thought.
has to be specific thought.
There is a
specific
thought.
action.
Yeah, it's one of those. I thought it was one of the commandments that are a verified thought.
Lo tishtachav elahem velo
We have the,
ta'adim. I don't think the Torah specifies thought.
right,
I don't,
Maybe it's forbidden.
yeah, but I don't think the
Is
Torah specifies thought, right? The Torah says don't bow down to them and don't worship them.
Okay, I was just following up on the additional perception of this as forbidding a thought,
Right,
that for
right.
a desire, really, I mean, an emotion.
and as far as fences, there's all sorts of thoughts about what to do with an idyllic object or something. How close you can come to it, and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
very all that. There's several things that seem to be
right. So another good
conspired
example
actually
would
doing-
be the Torah prohibits carrying false weights. Even if you're not using them, just to carry a false weight is in itself problematic.
Oh,
So again, it's not a ironclad rule, but in general terms, the notion of offense is generally assumed to be a rabbinic protective measure. Again, so it's not to say that it can't be that way, and if the Rambam's pretty clear that this is what he thinks it is. So I'm not going to say that the Rambam is wrong on such a basic thing, but anyway, let's dig a little deeper and see some of the other explanations to this prohibition. So the next is based in the Gemara and Bava Batra, and this is the opening. If anyone's ever studied Bava Batra, this is the first sugya based, the very first page. But the Gemara gets into, right, it's talking about if two people live in a home, in an apartment building, whatever, they have a common courtyard. They share, there's common, there's area that they share together. Can they make each other, can one make the other put up a fence or some sort of barrier between the two, sort of invisible property lines? And so in the course of the discussion, the Gemara says in source number 7, and here the English sort of embellishment on the translation is very helpful because we're not going into the whole sugya. So the Gemara says, "Halo ratzu ein mechayavin oto." If neither of the people sharing the courtyard want there to be a fence, then you don't obligate them to put up a fence or a wall between, to give some added privacy. Alma hezek re'iyah lav shmei hezek. So that would seem to imply that damage caused by seeing is not really considered a damage which is enforceable by law. What does it mean, damage caused by seeing? So we're not going to get into all the commentary, so just read the English here, which fills it in. Damage caused by sight, that is the discomfort suffered by someone because he is exposed to the gaze of others while he is in his own private domain, is not called damage. Okay, then the Gemara brings another proof. Ve'ema mechitza plukta kidichtiv, okay. Kevan deratzu bonin et hakotel bal korcho alma hezek re'iyah shmei hezek. Well, the Gemara says, well, that might be true, but if one of the owners of this shared courtyard does want a fence or a wall to be erected, then you have to force the other people to contribute to building that fence or that wall. So based on that, it would seem that hezek re'iyah shmei hezek, that damage caused by vision, caused by seeing, caused by unwanted looking is considered damage that can be legally legislated in one way or another. So we have this debate about whether just looking or at someone else is considered a legally recognized form of damage or not. So based on this, Rabbi Samad suggests the Torah's prohibition against coveting teaches us that a person may harm his neighbor even through mere thought. His desire for whatever belongs to your neighbor represents a sort of spiritual encroaching upon boundaries. And although the damage is not visible, it is even more serious than regular damage caused by the eyes. It cannot be measured in financial terms, nor can the coveter be sued in a court, but it is prohibited here in the last of the 10 commandments. So, right, according to this, that it is a way of harming someone, right? As you said, Arthur, if I have that nice car, if I, whatever it is, and I know that you want my car, so that makes me feel uncomfortable, right? That makes me that causes something, takes away certainly from my joy in having this nice thing. So knowing that someone else is coveting that which you have does take away from the owner's joy. So that might be what it's getting at. And the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot tells us, Rabbi Elazar HaKafar Omer, Hakina v'hata'ava v'hakavod, motzi'in et adam min ha'olam. Generally, we don't think of Pirkei Avot as halachic statements, but we do have this statement from Rabbi Elazar, who says that jealousy and desire and pursuit of honor remove a person from this world. So it seems, even if it's not punishable by Beit Din, because, right, in order for Beit Din to punish, there has to be a concrete action and there has to be warning, but at least B'yedei Shamayim, from God's perspective, there is some damage and there could even be punishment for just having those thoughts. Questions or thoughts on this one?
Can coveting also lead to positive actions? I covet your car. I really, really like your car, but I can't afford it because I don't have the education to get a good job, and it's going to lead me to go get the education, and I'm going to become a professional, and I'm going whatever. I mean, something along those lines.
Yeah. So I mean,
yeah.
Yes, and certainly if you look in the Musar books, they will talk about that. Taking these sort of negative impulses and making them into positives. A very interesting topic that maybe we'll have opportunity to get into at one point is the Gemara discusses the idea of kinat sofrim, jealousy of scholars. And so that is considered not only permitted, but actually laudable. And that's something that you should be jealous of if you see that someone has achieved, right? Whether that's only in Torah learning or if that would apply to the business world, to the world of science, is an interesting debate. But there is certainly an idea of kinat sofrim, of being having jealous thoughts towards people for their Torah achievements or their intellectual achievements, and that certainly can spur on to positive achievements on your own. Again, some will try to draw a fine line between sort of like that jealousy, that sort of desire is for it, versus coveting. Coveting might be a step too far, that I can see that someone else has accomplished something and I want to accomplish something, but if I'm going to the point that it makes me feel envious or negative towards them, that might be taking it too far. But we do have discussion about positive elements of all these negative character traits, including coveting and jealousy. So that's a really interesting topic, and it's one that I'll keep in mind to try to explore in more depth. The notion of kinat sofrim.
Can I ask a question regarding the story about Rabbi Akiva, who
Which story?
A story about him. He wanted to marry the woman who became his wife, but she was this daughter of a wealthy man. And Rabbi Akiva, was not Rabbi Akiva yet. He was an ignorant shepherd.
Yeah.
And the condition that the daughter of Kalba Savu, of the father of Rabbi Akiva's future wife, the condition that I think she places on Rabbi Akiva, you need to learn.
Right.
And so he has to go off and study. He wants to marry her. And one of the conditions she places on him to agree to the marriage, if I'm remembering it right, is that he has to learn for a significant amount of time in order to become the person he can be. So that's an issue of kind of ta'ava. that leads him to make a commitment that he might not have otherwise done.
What's the question?
No, but am I remembering it correctly? And if that's the
Yeah,
case,
but I
then we
mean,
have an example of tava having a kind of
right.
force that
So
can lead.
his desire to marry her, but it's not, I mean, it would be hard to find there being any element of coveting in that story. I'm not sure that she is jealous of anyone or wants what anyone else has. But yeah, but certainly like that would be another example of taking what we generally consider to be a negative trait, a negative thought, and using it for the positive. Um, it's a wonderful story. I'm not sure it's a low Tachmod story. But anyway, so then the next explanation is very similar, and Rabbi Samet brings Philo, the great philosopher, who says that brings this same idea of it causes harm to the person that covets, or the person, the object of the coveting. But he says also, he elaborates on its social significance. The family, the land, and all of mankind can ultimately be destroyed as a result of failure to suppress desires for various pleasures. The command, "You shall not covet," therefore has the potential to save the world. Right? So if it's true that it could cause damage and harm in a one-on-one relationship, so taken to the extreme or taken too far, such coveting can also can lead to the undoing of society as well. And certainly many wars have been fought over coveting one thing or another over the course of human history. So he sort of takes it to the next logical step.
Not to mention Genghis Khan.
Yeah. Okay, the next explanation is the Ibn Ezra, and the Ibn Ezra is probably, in the world of Torah learning, I think probably the most famous comment, the most famous approach to this idea. Ibn Ezra says as follows. I'll read in the Hebrew and give my translation. You can follow in the English. Someone will tell me when I should scroll the English down. Lo Tachmod. Anashim Rabim Yitzmehu al Zot HaMitzvah. Many people are greatly stressed or amazed or question this mitzvah. Echye Adam shelo yachmod davar yafeh belibo, kol ma shehu nechmad lemar'eina. How can it be that there's a person who doesn't desire in his heart something that is beautiful and enticing? Ata etain lecha mashal. So I'll give you an analogy to what this mitzvah really is referring to. Da ki ish kfari sheyesh lo da'at nechona u'hura'a bat melech shehi yafa lo yachmod ota belibo sheishkavima. You have a commoner, a village folk, who is of sound mind, and he sees the beautiful princess, and how beautiful she is, and how elevated she is. He's not going to covet her, because yada ki ze lo yitachen. He knows there's no possibility he'll ever be with the princess. Right? We can use this, whether this is a sexist analogous or not. That doesn't matter for us, but we can think of many other sorts of examples. And he says, in this villager, don't think that this villager is like not of sound mind, who thinks that he can grow wings and fly up to the sky. And also, right, so meaning the point is that even someone of sound mind understands that there's limits to what is realistically achievable and what's not realistically achievable for them. Right, he says, similarly, a person will not desire his mother, even though she's beautiful. Because he's been taught from a young age, right? This is not a woman of romantic desire for you. Kacha kol maskil tzarich sheida ki isha yafa o mamon lo yimse'enu adam ba'avor chachmato ve'adato. So then the Ibn Ezra says as follows. Anyone who is of sound mind, anyone who is intelligent will understand that marrying a beautiful woman or having a lot of money, don't come to a person because of his wisdom. Rak hasher chalak lo Hashem. It's not based on your merit, it's based on what God gives you. V'amar kohelet, v'ladam shelo amalbo yitnenu chelko. Right? Amru chachamim b'nei chayai mizonai lo b'zchuta talia milta ela b'mizala. And the rabbis say that children, a livelihood, sustenance is not based on a person's merit, but is based on a person's mazel, a person's luck. And if you have this understanding, then you won't come to covet. Meaning whatever possessions, whatever achievements a person has, is based on what God gives them. So there's a lot of interesting theological and philosophical questions to ask on the Ibn Ezra. Right? How do you balance? Certainly there is a theological truth to that, but there's also a truth that if you don't pursue the degree and you don't go for the job interview, all right, the famous story, you don't buy the lottery ticket, then you'll never get what perhaps is yours or could be yours. So there, right? He's not saying. I don't think he's saying that a person doesn't have to put in any effort to earning a livelihood or to finding a suitable partner or anything like that. But what he's saying is it's ultimately from God. And if you're doing your part and living your best life, you'll get whatever God sees fit to give you. And don't think that you can get something other than what God has given you. And so therefore it's foolish to covet something that someone else has. That's the gist of the Ibn Ezra. Any thoughts or questions on him?
Well, he's applying the logic to something which is maybe emotional.
He's okay, right. Right. He's saying you need to get the emotions out of it, right? That if you are overcome with those emotions, so you need to take a step back and think, well, wait a second. I have what God thinks is best for me to have, what I'm deserving to have, so I therefore shouldn't have these feelings.
The Rebbe has a version of it in terms of divine mission. We each have a mission, and Hashem provides us what we need to fulfill that mission.
Yeah.
And anything else is really not for us, because it doesn't have to do with really developing our full potential for the mission. So he feels that this recognition of that would preclude envious desires. Another
Yeah.
way to,
Yeah.
similar to what you said. Mhm.
So someone already mentioned the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that seems, the obvious response to this, which is Benzome Omer, Ezehu Ashir Hasameach Bechelko. Who is a wealthy person? Someone who is satisfied with his portion. Right? That certainly is the proper religious outlook to have when it comes to these matters. And if you're happy with what you have, you won't be covetous of what someone else has. So taking it to the next step, Rabbi Michael Rosenzweig, who is one of the Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshiva University, has a really interesting, sort of synthesis of what we've seen up until this point. In source number 12, he writes, "Herein precisely lies the unique ambition of the Torah as a value system that seeks to transform and define the human personality. The Torah insists that man's perspective can and must be shaped by the spiritual halachic values that give life its purpose. This is true not only with respect to belief in Hashem, without which life would cease to have meaning, but it is also true with regard to the equally indispensable value of proper approach to material goods." He says the reason, right, why this is included in one of these 10 commandments, these 10 core principles that are either of a higher stature or are, what God saw fit to give us first in the presentation of the Torah and Halacha, Why is this here? Because the halacha is meant not just to give us a list of do this, don't do that, but it's meant to transform us, to transform our personalities, and to give us not just not just a list of what to do, but a value system by which to live. And so, given all the different approaches that we've seen to what Lo Tachmod is, Rabbi Rosenzweig suggests that that it's meant to show us that the Torah and the Ten Commandments are trying to create a proper religious personality, not just someone that's able to, like a robot, follow the rules, but someone that is able to transform their personality based on what the Torah says.
Just a few days ago, Joshua said that Shabbos essentially involves everything, all the things that we do, that we don't do, thoughts, and so on and so forth. That Shabbos is really like a commandment that includes most
Yeah,
everything.
right. So I mean, it's a really important question. I think most of us assume this to be the case, that leading a life of halacha and commitment to Judaism is intended to do something for us spiritually, and to refine and shape who we are as people beyond just following the rules. And so there are many, many, many observant Jews who get caught up in just the details of halacha, and often, that's one of the biggest critiques of the halachic community, is that we get lost in the weeds of the details and oftentimes miss the bigger picture. And so perhaps, even though there's good questions raised about this, seems to not be deserving of inclusion in the list of the Aseret HaDibrot, no, perhaps it specifically is deserving to be included, because it does teach us that what we're doing and what we're being given is about so much more than just the check boxes.
Mhm.
And then the final step, I think it's the final step, is taking it to a more, this idea gets played out in many, many different ways, but one very beautiful application of it that I saw, this is a famous, often quoted medrash. I'm not going to do the whole thing now, but right, the medrash says that before God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, God went to all the other nations of the world and asked them if they want the Torah. And so the medrash says, Tchila halach etzel b'nei Esav. First, he went to the children of Esav. Amar lahem mikablim atem et Torah. Do you want? He asked them, "Do you want the Torah?" Amru lo ma katuv ba. So they say back to God, "Well, what does the Torah say?" Amar lahem lo tirtzach. God says, "It says don't murder." Amru kol itzmam shel otam anashim va'avihem rotzeachu. Say the entire essence of who we are and who our father was is a murderer. Esav, right? Esav was a wild man who went about and killed people. And that, whether that's true in the pshat of the Torah is a whole other question, but certainly the rabbis assume that Esav was a really bad guy, and Esav was someone who committed murder. And so then the next one he goes to is Bnei Ammon uMoav. He goes to the descendants of Ammon uMoav. Amar lahem mekablim matenat Torah. Ask them, well, do you accept the Torah? Do you want the Torah? Mulo ma katuv ba. They say to him, what does the Torah say? Amar lahem lo tin'ah. Don't commit adultery. Amrulo kol itzma shel erva lahem. Right? Our entire essence is based on improper sexual relationships. Ammon and Moab were conceived by Lot and his daughters. So it goes against who we are. And it goes on and on and on like this. Rabbi David Gottlieb, whom I've quoted many times, right, was the rabbi at Shomrei Emunah for several years, says that this medrash is a really troubling medrash, because he says all these mitzvot that God that caused the nations of the world to reject the Torah, these are all things that are prohibited to them. These are all things that are included in the Sheva Mitzvot B'nei Noach, and the Noachide commandments. So what does it mean that they rejected the Torah based on it? They already can't do this. Okay, maybe they will do it and they'll transgress the Noachide laws, but it's not something that they can, quote, get off the hook for by just saying we don't want the Torah. So Rabbi Galib says, no, that the key of this medrash is that it says, Kol itzumo shel oto anashim. The essence, not just that we have a desire and that, you know, we have a history that includes these improper acts, but it's become a part of who we are and who we identify with. And so he says that there's really two different things. And he says this in the name of Rav Shner Kotler. There's a fundamental difference between the comprehensive aim of the Torah and the more minimalistic goals of the seven Noachide laws. The Noachide laws are meant merely to regulate human behavior. These laws govern basic behaviors which everyone is expected to abide by. Even though a given prohibition may run counter to a person's natural inclination, nevertheless, the person is expected to sublimate that inclination and conform to the basic tenets of morality. The mitzvos of the Torah, on the other hand, are intended to go further and transform the personality of the one who observes these laws. For example, lo tirtzach, don't murder, in the Torah doesn't just prohibit murder. It is intended to create a personality that is incapable of committing murder. The same is true of the prohibition against adultery, theft, and all of the mitzvot. Right? That the Torah is meant, as we were saying, is meant to really shape our personality, shape our essence, go beyond, right? The Rambam famously writes that a person shouldn't say, I don't want to go to McDonald's and eat that cheeseburger because it's disgusting and it's, you know, who would ever want to touch such a thing? But rather admit it smells really good and I get really hungry when I walk past McDonald's or whatever non-kosher restaurants. That smells good. That's something I would love to have, but the Torah says don't do it. So it's an interesting question about when we should have that attitude and when we shouldn't have that attitude. The Rambam says that there are certain mitzvot that we don't do just because the Torah says don't do them. But the point that Rabbi Galib is making is that that might be true. There might be some mitzvot we don't understand or that we don't do just because the Torah says not to do them. But there are other mitzvot that are supposed to really shape who we are and make us into have an impact on our entire world outlook, our entire perspective, beyond just were we able to control our desires or not. And so it seems that might be what the Torah is getting at in Lo Tachmod. Lo Tachmod is about developing that personality. And if that's the case, then it certainly would be deserving and proper to be included in the first 10 in this list of Aseret HaDibrot, however we understand its significance.
Hmm.
Any final questions or thoughts on anything?
I was just thinking about the prohibition against coveting your neighbor and desiring his property and his wife. And then it's sort of juxtaposing it against the lines in the Ashrei, Poseach es yadecha umatzvia l'chol chai ratzon. So if he satisfies our every need and our every desire, then the desire of every living thing, then why should we covet something that someone else has anyway? Because he's supposed to be satisfying. I don't know what came first, the Aseres, the Divros, or the Ashrei, probably the Aseres, the Divros.
So that's a really interesting question, but presumably yes. Presumably yes.
But it
but the religious truth of the Ashrei, I think, might.
So if we say it every day,
yeah,
that he satisfies the desire of every living thing, then why should we need to covet what other people have?
Right. And I would just add to that also that lo tachmod, coveting, we don't need to live life as this zero-sum game or in this great competition. Right. Part of it, I think, is also being able to celebrate the accomplishments and the achievements and the life of other people, and not to think that takes away from what you have. So that certainly is sameach bechalko, that we should be happy with our portion. But going beyond that also to celebrate others, I think it's certainly a crucial lesson, and something that I think the Torah assumes we should be doing, and that might also be part of this.
There's
I-
also excuse me.
I just wanted to say I've been thinking all through this year about the story about Hillel and the person who comes to him and says, "Teach me the Torah while I stand on one foot," and he
Yeah.
says, "V'ahavta kamocha." So that idea of
Right.
know,
So
of-
he doesn't. He actually says he says it in the negative. He says this desane alech lechavei al tavid, that which is hated by you, don't do to your friend, which is the negative formulation of Yahavta lecha kamocha. But yeah, exactly. That's the klal gadol b'Torah, right? That is the great principle of Torah. Yesh koach, thank you. Anne, were you saying something else? No. All right. Well, if that's
Rabbi,
it,
this is one other thing, please.
yeah.
The last two words of the 10th commandment, asher l're'echa,
Mhm.
has 7 letters in it. And when I was learning about it, it makes the Aseres Adibros 620 letters, which are the 613 plus the 7 rabbinic ones. And so the rabbi.
7 Noachide ones.
Yeah. Pardon me?
7 Noachide.
No. The 7 rabbinic commandments. Ones like washing hands before eating
Okay.
bread, the boundaries, the eruv of the Shabbos, lighting the Shabbos candles, celebrating Purim and Hanukkah, and reciting Hallel. Those.
Okay.
Okay, so that makes it into actually 620 commandments. But the expression asher l're'echa, since we are called Hashem's friend, and these are ones that are our rabbinic commandments, they come from us, that belongs to your friends, so that the rabbis are seen as God's
Interesting.
friends,
Okay.
and we in making the commandments.
Okay. That's nice. All right. So I hope this was as interesting for you as it was for me. I certainly, this was a very new perspective for me on this, as I said, often overlooked of the Aseret HaDibrot. We've got a big Shabbos in Shul. I hope everyone will join us as we celebrate with Lou and Gwen, and Elon has his bar mitzvah. It should be a really great Shabbos. I will say, to get there early, there's going to be a big crowd. And so we're very much excited and looking forward to that. I know he's going to do a great job. And I will hopefully see everyone in Shul, and then we'll see you again on Zoom next week.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
All right. Have a great night.
Thank you.
you.